So the first drawing we're going to work on today has a lot of those complex surfaces. So as opposed to a Z chair, which is essentially just an extrusion, this is the Panton chair. What's that? There is a small little model of this thing upstairs. But the way we're going to sketch this, as opposed to drawing an extrusion, we're going to start in a very similar manner that we started with the Z chair. But I'm really looking at 4 lines. There's a line that is you'll notice this chair this is the edge of it, but it rolls forward and then it rolls back. So I'm looking at this line on both sides, this kind of far extent line on both sides, and then there's this center line. And we're going to use those lines to construct this chair. Now the good news is that this surface and the opposite surface up to here are basically parallel. This almost comes back, almost comes back and goes straight back towards the left vanishing point. But we're going to sketch this chair using contours. It's actually a fairly quick sketch. It's one that I really like, and we're going to use those contours to begin to show off some of what that form is. And in fact, our drawings might be a little bit more descriptive than this photograph as far as what those contours are doing. So let's get started. If I break up the proportional relationship of this chair, I'm just going to put a line right here, a line coming down. I'm trying to find what would be a square, because again, a square is basically the easiest proportion for me to see. It looks like it's just a little bit further back. So I'm breaking this up just to understand the proportional relationship of it. Didn't I say I was going to use pencil? And then if I extend that up, I've got some extending out of that square there. I've got some extending out of the square here. It looks like if I move this down just a little bit, that's closer to my square proportion. So that should help me in setting up the proportion of my drawing. The relationship of that square to a square here, I'm going to make the assumption that the depth of this, moving back, is just under a square. The same square or square unit that we're starting with here. Now, again, what I want to emphasize is that most of the times that we draw something, we want to establish, before we put pen to paper, pencil to paper, or whatever, I want to establish the viewpoint with which I would see this chair. Where's the horizon line on this photograph?
Middle of the back, right?
Yeah, it looks like it's somewhere in here. That's not what I want. What I want is I want my horizon line above the chair. So I'm going to look at this angle down here. Notice how shallow this angle is coming back. That means that, again, it's fairly close to the horizon line. I want a more severe angle, and I want to see more of the side of the chair, just like with the Z chair, than of the front of the chair. If you just look at a straight front view of this chair, it's not nearly as exciting as looking at the side of this. This is a pretty dramatic view. This is a little bit better because I can see more, but I want to essentially angle this down a little bit so that I'm looking more down on it, so that I increase the angles down here, and I want to make sure that that my horizon line is above the chair, and I want to see more of the side than I see of the front. This is almost from a vantage point of seeing both sides, this is about what I want. I just want to rotate this down. So, I'm actually going to draw the chair facing this direction, where the front of it's coming this way. But let's get started. I'm going to start with just that leading edge of a box. And we're not going to use the box quite as much on this, but we will use some of the corners. And then I want a fairly shallow angle going towards the right vanishing point. And I want a little bit more severe angle. I'm going to go ahead and establish the top of my chair. I still want some convergence happening so that I'm still above this chair. My eye level is above this chair. And I just want to share one more time, just this one little trick to help me establish this convergence, because, you know, going back to our 3 rules, if this is a shallower angle, it means I'm further away from the right vanishing point. If this is a steeper angle, I'm closer to the left vanishing point, and what that means is that this is going to converge at a faster rate. But how do I know that rate? And one way to kind of figure that out is I can just draw a straight up rectangle. There's no convergence on this rectangle, but I'm going to find where these 2 points meet. I'm going to draw a line straight up to hit right here. I'm going to draw a line straight up here, and I'm going to complete this rectangle. All these lines are either perpendicular to the, all these lines are parallel to the edge of my page, so they're literally horizontal and vertical. What that does is it will establish my rate of convergence. Well, excuse me, I've really already established that, but it'll help me find it going towards the left vanishing point. I can take this same point that goes through this corner of the rectangle here, and I'm going to go through the corner of the rectangle over on this side. And it should be fairly obvious that this is converging a little bit quicker. So that's one trick when you begin to set up a drawing like this that you can employ to at least establish your convergence a little bit better. So if you're still struggling with convergence, that's just a helpful trick. I'm going to look at this line. I'm going to go ahead and put in and break this in half. So I'm just going to look at that's about halfway up. This is about halfway up, and that can give me another convergence. So I'm going to establish that. This is about halfway up. This leading edge is going to be the first leading edge of this rectangular object. Again, these are up on OneNote if you do want to look, or I don't know if these photographs are, but there are some photographs of this chair on OneNote if you want a reference image. All right, so I need to establish the square face over here. The way that I've oriented this, where it is left of the horizon line, which side of a square should I see more of? The right side or the left side? The right side or the left side? I should see more of the right side. It's approaching an even proportion, and then I'll see a little less of this left side. I'm going to go ahead and draw that all the way up. I do also want to go ahead and complete my rectangle, so these lines that are invisible back here, I want to go ahead and complete those. And so there's my basic setup. I do also want to, let me correct that a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put this, the back edges of the bottom cube in there. So if I look at this and I've broken up my proportion, what I'm looking for right now, I'm actually gonna, the first lines that I'm gonna draw are not this edge, but actually where this comes proud of this edge and comes all the way up. And so when I look at that, it comes out, you can barely see this, it comes out a little bit right here and back. But I'm looking at this curve, I'm looking at this distance right here, and that distance kind of carries me up to this corner. And I'm just going to try and mimic that over here. So I'm going to look at that distance, comes a little bit proud of that edge, comes up to that corner. Now, very similar to your irregular shapes in perspective, I could use some of that to construct this, but hopefully, you know, all that construction is not quite as necessary as it has been in the future. So I'm just going to carry this point over to where it meets the back of the rectangle, and I'm going to try and essentially copy and paste this curve back here. Then if I look at the seat, so again I'm looking at this edge, if I look at the seat, it's coming back. there's this very, very slight angle. It's maybe a 1 degree angle coming back. And I'm going to carry that back, and even though there's a radius here, I'm actually just going to, because I like to draw big smooth curves, I'm going to draw a full curve that kind of comes back to that point. And then I'll move that point up and then come in and draw this curve. So from here, that corner, I dip, well actually I go slightly above this, but I do want to make sure that the overall arc that I'm drawing in here is angling down just a little bit. Then what I can do is I can put this large radius on the front. So and this is a technique that I use a lot, and this is what, you know, kind of designer sketches begin to look like designer sketches. When I draw in a curve, if I draw in a big curve like this, I may go beyond what I need to and then draw in another curve like this, and then come back in and fillet that before I darken everything in. Those extra curves that I put in there, that's you know, a lot of times when you look at a sketch and you're like, hey, a designer did that, it's because you'll see those extensions. So then here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm going to draw this almost as if it's an extrusion. This does begin to narrow up back here as it approaches the top, but I'm going to go ahead and draw it in, and I'm looking at a point about right here inside of my cube, so about right here. I'm going to go ahead and draw that up. It extends back behind this cube. I'm going to draw in that curve. And I'm going to carry that curve over to the other side. That point. Let's see, it intersects about right there. Let me go ahead and carry this back. That's where that curve should intersect. If anything, there would be some slight convergence in this. As I look at this, let's see, it looks like I'm leaning back just a little too much. So I'm just gonna correct. And what happens, that peak is about at the top of my cube unit, right back here. And so I'm gonna find the center, draw a line back, it curves back in the middle. But ultimately what I want to do is I want to slightly take these curves and taper them in. So even though I've got these extra curves out here, and maybe when you get better, you get a little bit more attuned to this perspective stuff, you wouldn't have to necessarily draw the first set of lines. I just think that they help. And then I'm going to put this big curve or fillet in. And if it is a radius, then that means that it's actually, and I wouldn't necessarily do this, I just want you to look real quick. That's part of an ellipse, and I didn't put my minor axis in there. It's part of an ellipse, and the reason why this would be important is you kind of want to understand when you begin to do stuff like this is what part of the ellipse makes up a fillet. And so now here's where we're going to use our contour lines. So here's the funky thing about this chair. The front 2 feet, I guess, the base wraps all the way back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually draw in, and I need to reference this proportionally, I'm going to draw in the curve that makes up this large elliptical curve. It's not a circle in perspective, it's an elliptical shape in perspective already. But let me find the center of this bottom square and carry that back towards my vanishing point, and it looks like I'm about yay far past that, so I'm going to put a dot right there. Just like with the sunglasses, when I draw in this curve, it's a big old elliptical curve. The main thing I want to think about is that curve should come through that point tangentially, in a tangent manner, to this line going towards the left vanishing point. In fact, I'm going to draw that part of the curve in first. Just come through tangent, just a big, this will be like an extreme ellipse. Just a big elliptical curve that comes back. and wraps around. That's part of my base. So I've got the footprint, I've got this kind of leading edge drawn in. I'm going to wait to do this offset right here till last, but really what I want to do now is I want to reference this center line of this chair, and if I follow it along with this pencil right now, it comes up through here. It doesn't come all the way out to the edge, and then it wraps around like this, and it comes up like so. And so I'm going to draw that. And before I draw that, I'm actually going to draw what it would be like if it was an extrusion, just a straight up extrusion. So I'm going to take this curve, move it over to the center of my object, and I'm very, very lightly going to draw in that curve, that same curve. Coming up, coming back, rolling through, and then coming up to meet in the back here. Because what I want to do, since this curve, everybody look up for just a second, make sure you're checking this part out. I'm going to draw a center line referencing the one that I just drew in there. I'm going to draw a center line, and I know that it needs to be inside of that curve that I just drew. I know it needs to be a little bit lower, and I know back here it needs to be further back than that original curve that I drew in there. So it needs to be further back. So let's do that. I have to come from this back point, right? Because this makes up my thing. And I'm ultimately going to come through and hit a curve about here. So this is going to come up, hit that curve. It's going to stay below this middle section line, contour line. And then as it goes towards the back, it gets really deep. And then this comes up not quite at as much of an angle as the rest of my back. Now I want to see that line on your sketches. I want to see this contour line. If you make it a little too dark for this drawing, that's okay, just to make sure that you see it. But really my chair is beginning to take shape. The last thing that I need to do is maybe look, I'm looking at this leading edge. It begins to disappear, like there's a pretty tight radius right through here, and it begins to disappear up here, but I'm still referencing that. And I ultimately need to wrap around. It really starts to come in about right here and right here, but I need to wrap around and hit that back point, and then come back down and hit this tangently. So I'm going to darken up this edge. This is my leading edge. These were some construction lines I drew. I can make it really dark on the back side because it's a number 2 line weight. It really transitions from a 2 line weight into something not quite a 2. I'm going to continue. I just see this silhouette. I'm not going to see the wraparound on the edge of this chair on the back. I'll only see it on the front. And then I'm going to follow this in. Where people mess this chair up is they don't know what to do up here. I don't see a line running from the front leg to the back leg. That line wraps around all the way to that back point and then comes back forward. So I'll also see a pretty heavy silhouette just right here on the legs, and then it'll disappear. And in fact, if I really wanted to draw another contour line to show what that shape did, I would actually wrap this around this way. Don't worry about that. Just draw a darker line in here that begins to disappear. The last detail that I need to draw on this chair is this edge. And I'm trying to follow it. Comes up through here, and then it gets a lot closer, and in fact, again, that radius begins to disappear up near the top. But what I'm going to do first is draw. It's not quite going exactly back towards my right vanishing point. And I'm just gonna, you know, normally I draw really quick gestures. I could draw a really quick gesture coming up like this. I could draw a really quick gesture coming back like this. And then I could draw one last one that begins to disappear into that original line coming up like so. And this should be a number 2 line weight. You could add a little emphasis to this if you wanted. Tell you what, Shay, I like this colored pencil. The only thing I don't like about it is I struggle to make the really light lines light enough. You know what? I would add this just slight subtle curve in here, right there. Just let it stop about halfway up, because that's the plastic and how we would see it. See how this is wrapping just slightly like that? I may have made that a little too big, but that's ultimately what's happening with this chair. Add a real heavy line on this footprint. All right, so let me just talk a little bit more about line weights, especially if you guys go back and redo this one. This should be a 2. Going around. Maybe a 3 just down here. A 2 right back here. I feel like I need this to be a little more consistent. This one should be maybe less than a 2. As this rolls around. And then this leading edge, the first curve that we drew to help establish this is right here. That you need to keep really, really quite light. It does help define the form. I got it a little dark right in there for my tastes. But then the last thing that I want you to do is make sure that I see this contour line as if I'm cutting this thing in half, which comes back to here and then comes up. I think it might come up a little bit straighter and then wrap just a little bit right there. If you do want to shade a little bit with your colored pencil, just look at what's happening with the light here. I'm not going to. I'm going to think about this opposite. But if I wanted to, I could put a little bit of shade running down here. I could shade this edge over on this side. And if I wanted to do any shading on the seat or the back, it might be just very, very light, approaching that back silhouette. You know what? I guess I will. I'm gonna do just a little bit of shading here. but I'm just going to hint at some of that coming through. When I look at my border relative to my chair, I kind of want to balance out my page a little bit. So I am going to put a small little background on this. And to balance the page out, I'm just going to make that background, I'm actually going to make it come a little bit further to the right of my chair than to the left.